So it's nearly August and the days are approaching 100, and the garden itself is really struggling. So it's almost time for thinking about the fall garden, but there's still a few plants going strong. Can you guess what this episode's going to be about? I'll give you a hint. Check out my beads. Stay tuned, find out. Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of Growing Some Louisiana History with me, David Hubbell, and you can tell by my bling, I've got a very spicy subject today, and that is Tabasco peppers. One of the oldest crops that's probably very synonymous with the state of Louisiana is Tabasco, due to the famous brand of pepper sauce. And today I'm showing you that you can grow these peppers in your own yard, and they have a pretty interesting and spicy history, if you will, themselves, at least the origin story. So let's get into it. So once again, thank you to everybody who's already subscribed to the David J. Hubbell YouTube channel. I appreciate it. If you haven't done so, all you gotta do is simply click the subscribe button and click the alert bell so you'll be alerted to all upcoming gardening and cooking videos. I'll get to some soon, believe me. It's getting to be time where I'm about to run out of things to do in the garden, so we'll turn to the kitchen instead. Looking back through the old newspapers, there appears to be at least maybe two origin stories, if you will. One says that about 1850, a famous Louisiana planter, Colonel Monsell White, where he obtained some pepper seeds from Tabasco region or the Tabasco state in Mexico, and he planted them at his Deer Run plantation near Myrtle Grove. So another story involves the McElhaney family, of which who invented the Tabasco pepper sauce that we know and love today. Back apparently in around 1852, a man named Gleason apparently gave Edmund McElhaney some seeds from a tasty pepper that he got while he was in Mexico back in 1847 and had been growing. McElhaney, being an avid gardener and planter, went back to Avery Island near Iberia and planted some on his property. Now this was around 1852. And Avery Island was named after, I think, his father-in-law, Judge Avery. So the Avery and the McElhaney families lived together on this property. Well, the peppers turned out to be something that they really enjoyed growing and had a good flavor. Well, Civil War came, and for those of you who are familiar with Avery Island, it's several little small islands kind of in a swampland, but it sits upon a big salt dome. And a lot of the Confederacy was getting its salt from Avery Island. So, as you can imagine, part of war strategies would be to cut off supply chains, and one of the things they did is the Union forces took Avery Island so that they could prevent salt being distributed, I guess, along the Confederacy in the South. So that forced the McElhaney and Avery families off their property, and I believe they ended up in Texas for a number of years. Well, the story goes is that when they got back to Avery Island, that the place, of course, was probably in disrepair, and of course, if you can imagine, the grounds themselves probably would not have been cared for a number of years. And one of the things that Edmund McElhaney found was that his pepper plants were still growing. And so, of course, this also financially devastated both families, and trying to figure out ways to flavor their foods without having the fortunes to do so with the spices that you would normally buy from New Orleans, where I believe Mr. McElhaney was actually a banker at one point. He started coming up with some sort of concoction on how to make some type of condiment. So there's actually a recipe in a cookbook that I'll show you in a bit, where they detail the simple recipe of how Edmund McElhaney created the Tabasco sauce. But anyway, it was flavorful enough that they enjoyed it, and they shared it with some friends and family, and it grew in popularity. So much so that they started selling this in 1868, and it's gone all over the world, very, very popular in England, as well as, I believe, it's been out in space, maybe to the moon. But it's made its way around, and it's probably one of my favorite pepper sauces. Now, Louisiana sauces in general, hot sauces, I'm not a real fan of extra hot, just for heat's sake. I like flavor. And if you are a pepper sauce connoisseur, which I'm not really, but you'll know at least enough that there's distinct flavors that each of them bring. Certain other brands, Louisiana pepper sauce is a mix of both Tabasco and cayenne. Crystal hot sauce is a mix of just strictly cayenne. About 1870, Edmund McElhaney actually trademarked the name for Tabasco pepper sauce. Now the controversy and the spiciness in the history is that some will say that Colonel Monsell White actually had a pepper sauce that he was creating and selling around the 1850s or late 1850s. So there's some controversy there to a certain extent, but I don't really see it as such. I think really what you have there is maybe someone who created a, like we do today, you know, somebody will have a good version, like Paul Prudhomme had his black and redfish, and then you have other people who didn't really quite know the recipe or wanted to put their own spin on it, and they, in honor or just to come up with something as sort of a riff on it, they come up with their own version. So I'm thinking that maybe what you got here is really something along those lines. Anyway, I'll tell you a little bit more about his recipe, or the traditional recipe for the Tabasco sauce, but we'll end up, let's talk a little bit more about the plants first. And so back in 2008, my wife and kids and my sister and her husband and kids, we made a trip out to Avery Island in New Iberia, and there we toured the plant, and that's something I really recommend you get to do if you get a chance. That and the adjacent jungle gardens that the McElhenney set up way back many years ago. It's a wonderful refuge there, and it's a beautiful place. The Tabasco factory, at least when we went in 2008, had a wonderful free little tour. You got in there, you watch a little historical video on the history, as well as they gave you some free samples of the Tabasco. And then you got a little history tour. They got a little small museum in there, as well as you can kind of watch the bottling line, and you see the mash. Basically what they would do is they take the peppers and they would mash them up, put them in a barrel, let them steep for a certain amount of time, and I believe they're actually adding salt at that point too, salt that from the salt domes on Avery Island. And then after a while, I think they add some French vinegar to it and let it sit in these, I think they're maybe even former bourbon barrels, but wooden barrels. And like I said, I'll go into more detail on that recipe just for those who are interested, if you grow these, to maybe try to duplicate your own version of it. But part of the tour ends at a restaurant / country store, at least it did then. And of course, if you're familiar with that brand, they also have done a great job with marketing, and that's where I first encountered the seeds. And these actually came from the same seeds that they grow the Tabasco peppers at. Now, with these are much like a lot of seeds. They grow well along the Gulf Coast. They don't tolerate a lot of cold weather. So what you would normally do is you would start them, take about 8 weeks before the last freeze occurs. So maybe late December, early January. You plant them. They take about 10 to 15 days to germinate. You get them started and you get the little plants going, and however you used to doing it with peat pods or whatever. Then you want to harden them off about a week or so, and then bring them out into the garden. Now, they have some really good recommendations on the back here that tell you precisely how they suggest you do it. Have some things involved in clipping the plants, hardening off, and even the soil and fertilizer recommendations. The plants, you should know, they can get as well anywhere from 3.5 to 5 feet tall. They are described as being good for rows, and so they recommend you keeping them like maybe 3 foot apart, because they can actually grow 5 feet tall. They actually can grow out 5 feet wide, so they can be a one plant under the right conditions can provide you with a lot of Tabasco peppers. And these peppers themselves, which you'll see out in the garden, they're anywhere from 1 inch to 2 inches long. They kind of look like Christmas lights, upright. And they'll start off as an either green or light green, and they'll go to an orange, and then they'll get to red. And the red that they look for, they actually have a little tool that they developed for picking them. And it's called Le Petit Bâton Rouge. And they use them out at Avery Island to compare the color. And when the color is that color red, I usually I'll do it this way so you can see past my shirt, this color red, they will know that it's ripe and ready for its full flavor. It's about an 80-day to maturity from the time you plant it to you're actually harvesting. So right now it is late July, almost August, and they're starting to ripen. And they'll stay ripe for, I mean, you'll get a lot of peppers, especially from now until really it starts to freeze. Now, I plant mine in a pot, primarily due to the fact that, like I've talked about in the past, I'm kind of limited to my spacing. But I kind of got the idea because if I have the old picture from when we went to Avery Island, they actually have theirs in a whiskey barrel. And it was a beautiful plant in a whiskey barrel. And I thought, man, I can do something like that. So I started planting mine in pots. And the bigger the pot, the better the pepper plant does. In fact, my brother-in-law Carson had some in a big planter at his house, and they've made a huge plant, and he got tons of Tabasco peppers off of it. So that just lets you know that you need to have plenty of good soil. It likes an acidic soil, anywhere from a 6.1 to 6.5, I guess maybe preferred, but I think it does well up to a 7.5. So one thing, if you do put them in pots, you may need to make sure that they have a lot of moisture, so that don't let them dry out too much. So fertilizing wise, they recommend a high ratio of phosphorus and potash and lesser amount of nitrogen. So that'll help you realize you're not trying to promote so much the greenery as you are promoting the roots and the fruit. The other thing that's interesting about these peppers is that unlike most peppers you get, whether it be bell peppers or cayennes, when you cut into them they'll be dry, but these peppers actually have a little bit of juice, and I think that's what helps allow you to create this pepper sauce that we like today. So you may ask yourself, well, what are you really doing with these peppers? On a heat level, you might ask, what are they? And so they actually kind of fall a little bit above medium, and on those, it's 30,000 to 50,000 on the Scoville units. So it's a little bit above medium heat. I personally, like I said, don't like a lot of heat, so when I use the sauce itself, I use a drop or two in, bring out the flavors and also the flavors that it adds. But if I'm using it, I mostly use it and grow it to make pepper jelly. And of course, when I make this pepper jelly, I've really cut it with some bell peppers because the bell peppers don't have a real hot flavor. But this, in my opinion, makes a slightly better pepper jelly than just, say, cayenne. I make it with cayenne, and I like the cayenne, but I like the Tabasco flavor and smell a lot better than I do the cayenne. There's just something about it. They're very close. It's just my personal preference. So I think it makes a good pepper jelly using that. Other people will use it to, stick the peppers in bottles, fill it with hot vinegar, seal it up, and just kind of let the juices, or let it marinate or sit in the juices, and you kind of extract the heat from that and use those peppers on your sauce. Some people pick them when they're lighter green, some people pick them when they're dark red. But like I said, my primary use is going to be for pepper jellies. And then I'll also, maybe if I'm pickling something like Melita or Gugutsa, I'll put a pod of Tabasco in there to add the heat to the system. So let's go check out what the plant looks like here in my yard. So here is the Tabasco plant. You can see I've got it in a pot here. At this point, this is just from one season. And you've got some really good examples here. You can see the light green peppers coming on here. It has these beautiful leaves. Let's see, I thought I saw, you can see some of the little flowers there as well. That's an interesting one where you can actually see the flower kind of dropping from the pepper. But as it matures, you start seeing the different colors, the oranges, and then we're starting to actually see some reds. So it has both a appeal from a standpoint of being both ornamental as well as functional from the standpoint of a food source. Now this is the biggest one I've got. Typically I like to have several because just due to the fact that I want to have enough to make pepper jelly. When I was selling pepper jelly, really kind of could barely keep up with what I was making. Now that I've kind of gotten out of that, other than just for family and friends, I don't need quite as many. But let's go over here to some of the other plants. So here you can see I've got a lot more red ones on here, or orange ones. We'll try to use the tester to see. At least from this vantage point, it looks like they're about ready to pick. So let's try one here. Usually they kind of just fall right off easily. Oh, that one did. So you can kind of see it up close. It's probably not quite as red as that, but overall it's pretty good. It's got a nice scent to it as well, at least in my opinion. But like I said, when it's all the different colors are there, it's just like Christmas lights. As I mentioned, the main reason that I grow my Tabasco peppers is to make pepper jelly. And when I had my Hubbell's Hearth business, this was one of my big sellers. Now I just make it for myself and my family and friends, but it's real popular, especially around Christmas time, on some cream cheese. But you can make vinaigrettes with it. Let's see, you can glaze. I've got a couple of recipes on the YouTube channel here that you can find where I actually break it down with some of the other jellies and use it as a glaze for different sausages or meatballs even. So it's very good. I think my mother-in-law would put it on a sandwich as part of as another condiment. So like I said, you can utilize your peppers to make other things, and not, or you may just like to eat them straight. Now, in the Tabasco cookbook, which is one of the cookbooks I recommend you get, it tells you a lot of ways to use the product itself, but it has also gives the basic recipe that Edmund McElhenney used. By crushing the ripest red peppers, adding half a cup of Avery Island salt per gallon, and letting the concoction age in crockery jars. Then when the 30 days were up, he would add the best French vinegar to it. And then occasionally stirring the batch carefully by hand, and let the mixture age for another 30 days so the flavors could intermingle. And then he'd strain the sauce and he'd fill small cologne jars with sprinkled fittings. That way the bottles were corked and then dipped in a green sealing wax. And so today you'll still see sort of that same color motif in their bottles. From a seed source standpoint, you can find Tabasco peppers pretty much a lot of locations. I try to keep these up from the Tabasco Country Store because I know that they are sourced from the same ones that they used. But a lot of other products that you could buy at one time, or if you knew somebody, would be things like the actual pepper mash. And people use this to actually maybe season in their crawfish or shrimp boils. So one thing you could do is take your peppers and mash them like this, dry them out, and sprinkle them in your favorite boils. So the other thing is, if you know somebody, or you can even acquire it at one time, is the stuff that's really kind of toward the bottom of the barrel. And this is really potent. As you can see, I haven't really used a lot of it. I appreciate getting a bottle of it from my friends Max and Michelle Morvant. That helped out a lot. And today, of course, the McElhaney's make more than just the traditional Tabasco. They have, of course, habanero and garlic blends as well. But an interesting thing from the tour is that even though they all start the Tabasco seeds at the Avery Island site, they actually have 2 or 3 growing locations. And that's to help ensure against hurricane damage that affect Avery Island. So if you haven't tried growing these, I suggest you try them. I'll see if I can find if Tabasco is still selling these online, and if not, just try your hand at finding a good, reliable source out of South Louisiana. So if you've been growing Tabasco peppers in your yard, I'd like to hear your experiences with them. Please leave them in the comment section below, or send me a comment at rpcajun2r@gmail.com, or if you have any questions about any of the vegetables I've been growing. Hopefully this information has been useful to you, and if it has, please give it a like and share with your Tabasco or pepper loving friends. Again, if you haven't already done so, I'd appreciate if you would subscribe to the David J. Hubbell YouTube channel, and click the alert button to be alerted to all upcoming videos. Thanks again for tuning in, and I will see you next week.